Hello and welcome to By My Spirit. This program is designed to bless those who are seeking the will of God through His Holy Spirit in everyday living. I will remember that we've shared John 16:13 with you many times, where Jesus promised the disciples that He would send the Spirit to guide them into all truth. So we know that He's already sent the Spirit to inspire the Bible writers, and we can study there and have God be speaking to us. In this current series, we're talking about the biblical principles of money management, and they've been given to us through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. I'm your host, Ed Reed, and I pray that the training and experience that I have as a pastor, an attorney, and financial planner will be blessed by the presence of God's Spirit during this program to help you in this important topic. For those of you who are maybe just joining us, you'll want to have your Bible, and you'll also want to refer to the book. It's your money and workbook. I know many of you have this already. At the end of the program, I'll let you know how you can secure a copy for yourself. The topic today is inheritance and estate planning. And as we begin that, let's bow our heads and have a moment of prayer together. Father, I want to thank you for the opportunity to study this important topic again with principles from your word, and may we be able to be blessed and enlightened as we study the topic. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, it's interesting also that stewardship is a broad area, but it includes not only the earning time, but also the returning time. What we do with what we have left in our estate is just as much our responsibility as what we do with what we have while we're living. So I think that stewardship is the crowning act of our stewardship. That is, the estate planning part is the crowning act of stewardship. I'm going to read a couple verses in the Bible. The first one is Matthew 25 and verse 19. This is in the parable of the talents, and where it says He called His servants and gave them different talents, each one different amounts. But then it says in verse 19, after a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. So every one of us will have a time, either when we pass away or when the second coming occurs, to give an account of the way we've handled the talents of money that God has blessed us with. I think this is really important. We must all give an account of our stewardship. Now, let me just give you what I think is a basic principle in this regard. Earlier in the programs, we've determined that God is the owner of everything and that we are managers. And we find that in Psalm 24, verse 1, Psalm 50, verse 12, 1 Chronicles 29, 13, and 14, and so on. The Bible is very clear that God's the owner and we are managers. Since that is the case, when I'm finished with it and my family's needs are taken care of, what should I do with the balance? Well, it sounds pretty logical to me that I should return it to Him, the rightful owner. And that's what we do with a proper estate plan. We return to God that which He has entrusted to us. Now, many times, especially here in America, and I'm sure it's true around the world, people die without an estate plan, that is, without a will. What happens if you die without a will? Well, some people say that your money goes to the state. Rarely does it ever happen that way. If you have no living relatives on either side of your family, up or down the family tree, then your property would go to the state. We use the word escheat to the state, and that'll, repair bridges or fill potholes or whatever they ended up doing with it. But for most people, if they don't have a will, the state's laws of descent and distribution come into play, and the laws of intestacy, and that means that your relatives, whether they need it or not, whether you'd like them to have it or not, whether they'll make good use of it or not, your relatives will get your estate. And this is pretty simple when you see it in that way. So what is actually the common practice of people? Well, the most common practice is to do nothing, which causes serious problems for the heirs and also for those who must probate the estate, because they have to go through a very rigorous court process to probate the assets and so on. But among those who do make plans, typically they give it to their children. And in many cases, these are grown children who may not even need it. So I'm going to suggest to you that there's a Bible verse about this that we might want to read together, and it's Ecclesiastes 2:21. Ecclesiastes 2:21. Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, of course, was written by the wise man Solomon, and he says in chapter 2, verse 21, "For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil." This is incredible. Leaving your estate to somebody who has not worked for it, this is vanity and a great evil. So many people actually put it off and don't do anything. Others give it to relatives. But what I'd like to share with you is that in actual fact, we're encouraged to have an estate plan, and I will just tell you what I believe would be a good one. Now, you'll note that we're in the workbook here on page 31 that the Christian will should be new and different. Well, what is new and different about it? Well, I will just tell you it's not just a different will in the sense that I've had probably 6 different wills since I was, a young man. When my wife and I first got married, we made wills and so on. But they're not all 6 valid. The one last in time, first in right, we say. But at any rate, you can update your will to match your current estate plan and your current interest. And nowadays with computers, your attorney probably has your computer, your estate plan on his computer, and it can be changed very easily. So making a will does not hasten the day of your death. It just simply helps you to die prepared. Now, I'm going to look at several of the statements that I will bring to you about this, but I'll just give you a general idea that nobody really dies without a will. If you don't have your own personal written will, the state will make one for you. Now, this is an interesting thing, though. If you die without a will, the state assumes that you are an atheist, because in no case would any of your assets be returned to God through a church or charity, even if it has been your normal way of life, your modus operandi, to pay tithe and offerings and support missions and so on. If you don't have a will, not 1 cent of it will go to a church or charity. So you realize that you have a will, either one you've made or one the state makes for you, and the big question is, what kind do you have? So your will really is the crowning act of your stewardship. We're going to talk about some other ideas here, and I hope that you'll find these helpful. And first of all, on the top of page 32, remember God's ownership. In other words, if things belong to God, God should be factored into what we do with our estate plan. Now, we also want to talk about the proper uses of money. From several different references, we found that there are 3 uses for money. And that is, 1, our needs, and that's always put first. The second one is the needs of others. And the third one, the cause of God. Remember that the second and third one store up treasures in heaven, which we want to do. And the first one makes sure that our needs are taken care of. Now, the interesting part is we should use any unneeded assets then to help in the cause of God. For example, you could help with a church in India or to build a church. It's just incredible how cheap that is. In addition, you could put the metal roof on churches in Africa. There's lots of different things. So the big question that people ask, well, what % should I give to God? I'm going to give you a little indication here. The question, the bottom line is not what %, but how much belongs to God. That would help us to focus a little bit. In my early wills, I had put down there 20% for God. And I had already tithed my estate, but I just thought, well, I'll give God a double tithe with my estate, and he should be thrilled because this is a lot of money. But the fact is, I'm just going to tell you that we were planning to give 80% to our relatives, my siblings, my wife's siblings, our parents, and that kind of thing. Then we got to thinking, well, we're making them responsible for our stewardship, and God is asking us to use it for his benefit. So we've actually rewritten our wills and made it a totally different way, and I'm going to explain my will at the end of this session so you'll be able to understand. There's also this idea of the value of present giving. You will understand that since people argue about estate planning and people are always wanting to get something from someone else, that there are, lawsuits and all kinds of things. If you make a present gift while you have your wits about you, there's nothing to argue about when you pass away. In addition to that, present giving is valuable because you can distribute your assets while you're living and see the good it's doing. So I tell people, if you do your giving while you're living, then you're knowing where it's going. You're going to be able to see for sure the value that it has. And I think this is really an important thing to remember. We also need to understand that our stewardship and estate plan is an individual responsibility. God has given me things that he wants me to take care of. If every generation passes it on to their kids, then no one accepts responsibility for the stewardship of that amount. So 80% of the time, it might be interesting for you to know, the husband will predecease his wife. That is, the husband will die before the wife. So 80% of the time, the wife is left to actually distribute the assets. It's very important then that wives are taught and understand these principles so that when that time comes, they have a plan made and they're able to do the right thing. Now we're going to talk about, I'm going to read a few statements to you, and then we're going to talk about when to maximize gifts to children and when to minimize gifts to children. Some people ask the question, well, doesn't the Bible or doesn't Ellen White talk about don't give gifts to children? The answer is no. Both are very clear that if we have dependent children, children who cannot take care of themselves, that they should be priority number one in our estate plan. Things change, however, when my parents think about me as a grown person who doesn't need their assets. Now, this is an important thing, and so we're going to talk about it from this perspective. Volume 4 of the Testimonies, page 478 and following, the one I'm going to read now is actually on page 483, gives some real interesting insight into this area. We're told your wife and children, of course, should not be left destitute. Provision should be made for them if they are needy. Now, we're talking about adult children here. But do not simply, because it is customary, bring into your will a long line of relatives who are not needy. So we're talking about later on the same page, he says that Christians should be reformers and bring into their will something that is new and different. So I'm going to share with you what that is. And it's mentioned in Volume 4 of the Testimonies, page 480. It says, that which many propose to defer until they are about to die, if they were Christians indeed, they would do while they have a strong hold on life, while they still have their testamentary capacity. Then she says, they would devote themselves and their property to God, and while acting as His stewards, they would have the satisfaction of doing their duty. Now, here comes the interesting sentence of what makes a Christian will new and different. By becoming their own executors, they could meet the claims of God themselves instead of shifting the responsibility upon others. Now, that's the real interesting part. Now, typically, an executor doesn't even come into play until a person dies. So how can you become your own executor? And the fact is real simple. You put together the plan and do your best to disperse your assets while you're living. And then your estate planning documents, your trusts and will and so on, those kind of things only take care of the part you didn't have time to distribute yourself. Someone said the real goal of a Christian should be to die penniless, but the trick is dismantling. Obviously, we don't want to get rid of everything because we need something to live on in our later years. I'll share with you now something interesting. We have in life, and this is a term of art in the law, that we call testamentary capacity. That means that you have to have your wits about you enough to realize what your assets are, who your loved ones are, and those kinds of things. So I'll just tell you that many years ago in Volume 7, page 295, we had this interesting counsel, which includes testamentary capacity. To the aged who are losing their hold on this life, I appeal to make a right disposition of your Lord's goods. Before you fall asleep in Jesus, remember that you are God's stewards. And here comes the interesting sentence now. Do not fail of attending to this while you have your reason. You've got to have your wits about you to make a will. There are many people alive today who do not have enough of their mental capacity anymore to make a will. And so they don't have what we would call testamentary capacity. As age comes upon us, it's our duty to make disposition of our means to the instrumentalities that God has established. Well, I believe this is kind of an important feature, but I'm going to talk to you about the children idea. Many references, and we're told that we should seek counsel of people who know what's going on in this area. And I might add in the seminar that I'm not seeking work. I really do not do any professional work anymore. I'm traveling so much and so on, but I just want you to understand you should seek professional help in this. Now, it's fascinating that people sometimes do not seek advice. Sometimes people say, well, they want to charge me $150 to do a will, and, I can go to the stationery store and get one, or I can download one off the internet or whatever. But every family is unique and different. Different children, different needs, different assets, and I think your will should be custom-made with your input before a professional attorney who has the ideas that may suggest to you things that you should not forget or that you might actually forget if you don't seek counsel. Well, I'm just going to tell you, in the 4th volume of the Testimonies, again, there's a whole section on wills. I suggest that you read it. One of them says on page 478, the means that we have, the money that we have, was only lent to them of God to be returned to Him, but in 9 cases out of 10, these brethren, when passing from the stage of action, appropriate God's property in a way that cannot glorify Him, for not $1 of it will ever flow into the Lord's treasury. Much more we could say about this, but I'm only going to go on to talk about the individual responsibility, and this is important. Listen to the emphasis I place on this statement. This is another section in the Spirit of Prophecy Council, Volume 3, page 121. Parents should exercise the right that God has given them. He entrusted to them the talents that He would have them use to His glory. The children were not to become responsible for the talents of the Father. While they have sound minds, here again is that testamentary capacity, and good judgment, parents should, with the prayerful consideration and with the help of proper counselors who have experience in the truth and a knowledge of the divine will, make a disposition of their property. Now I'm going to read an interesting statement so we can fill in the blanks here, and then I'll give you a couple of illustrations. Now this is important. If they have children who are afflicted or struggling in poverty and who will make a judicious use of the means, they should be considered. But if they have unbelieving children who have an abundance of this world, we're talking about adult children now, they commit a sin against the Master who has made them His stewards by placing the means in their hands merely because they are their children. Now, I'm going to give one other statement, and then we're going to look at how to fill in the blanks on page 33. Parents should have great fear in entrusting children with the talents of means that God has placed in their hands unless they have the surest evidence that their children have greater interest in, love for, and devotion to the cause of God than they themselves possess. And that these children will be more earnest and zealous in forwarding the work of God and more benevolent in caring for the various enterprises and the enterprises connected with it which demand for means. Now here's the interesting part about all of this. Let's just assume that I get this large inheritance. What's the purpose? Should I go out and buy an airplane or buy myself a yacht or take some exotic vacation? The answer is I have been given the responsibility of my parents' stewardship. This is really, really incredible. So as a Christian, I have a responsibility to do what they should have done as a Christian. So when should we maximize gifts for children? If you're filling out your workbook on page 33, here's the answer. When they're dependent and needy. That is, when they're before the age of majority, before their college education, before they're independent on their own. That's when you should maximize gifts to children. Another one, the second one, is if they are afflicted. And you understand that what that means. An afflicted person may have some birth defect or some physical or mental weakness that they were going to require help their whole life. And we all know families who have had that responsibility and burden, and of course they're going to have to remember those children even into their adult life. And then also we're told that you can remember children if they're going to be more liberal with God's cause than you yourself were. Now that's probably a rare situation, but that occurs and that could be a happening. The second one, or number 3 here, is when to minimize gifts to children. When to minimize gifts. Now we're talking, remember, adult children. This is people like myself who have, their job and their career and they are independent people. When they are unbelieving adults, now this is an important thing, unbelieving adults, that means nothing would go to charity if you gave it to them. A second one is when they have an abundance, they're already taken care of. And the third one is when they are serving the world. In other words, their lifestyle is not the kind of thing that would be conducive to Christian giving and so on. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of illustrations. One is in my own will. And I'm doing this only because I can demonstrate for myself something that I think will be valuable for you to know. I mentioned earlier that when I first wrote my will, I had 80% to family members and 20% to God. We've actually turned that around. We actually have it now where 80% goes to the cause of God, and those who survive us would get token gifts that would amount to 20%. And the reason that we did that is because we believe that God is the owner. We want to return it to Him. Now, we also did something unusual. We asked our children, we have 2 children, a son and daughter, we asked them when they were in high school, when we do our estate plan, would you rather get your money when you graduate from college, or would you rather wait until we're 90 years old and you're 65? Well, you know, that's almost a no-brainer. They would rather have it when they're starting out in life. So we decided, and we feel this is an appropriate thing, we actually gave our children their retirement, their inheritance, when they graduated from college. So our son Andrew actually used the money to pay his way through law school to get a professional degree. The interesting part about it is that's when they need the help, when they're just starting out in life, to help them to be debt-free. Now, I remember an interesting thing that happened. That doesn't mean we're never going to give any gifts to our children, but the primary part of their inheritance they've already enjoyed. I remembered when we moved to the Washington, D.C. area a number of years ago, Andrew, our son, was helping to load the moving van, and in the process, they were taking out one of the big file cabinets, and it wasn't locked properly, and one of the drawers slid open. Fortunately, it didn't spill out, but it slipped open, and right in plain view to Andrew was a file that said, Last Will and Testament, G. Edward Reed. Well, Andrew was quite interested in that, so he took the file out and took the will out and folded it up and put it in his pocket. Unbeknownst to us, later that evening, he read it out loud to his sister Melissa. And later, when we actually were unloading in Washington, Andrew said, Dad, I guess I should tell you that I read the will while we were moving, and I read it to Melissa. And he said, one thing we learned is that we're better off with you alive than dead. So that helps me to understand that they're not waiting around for me to die. They're actually glad that I'm alive and I can remember their birthday and special occasions and those kinds of things. But that is what I believe is a Christian will. Now, I want to tell you another one, and this is very personal, and I only tell you this so you can understand how a Christian will would function. A number of years ago, my mother called me, and she was about 70, my father 72, and she said, Ed, Dad and I are thinking about making our wills, and we'd like to know your counsel about this. And she said, we know, I have 3 brothers, she said, we know that 2 of you are very active in your Christian experience and 2 aren't. And so we really don't know what to do with that. And I said, well, I'll tell you what I think you should do. I think that you've already worked hard to put us through school and help us with our education and so on. And I said, I think that you should probably treat us all exactly alike. Why don't you just give us each $500 to buy a plane ticket to your funeral? And then, should you pass away before Jesus comes, we can come to your funeral and give the rest of it back to God. And my mother says, well, I've been reading this, and that's what I was thinking too. And she said, you know, there are different entities that have made an impact on our lives, and we wanted to give some to those organizations, and our local churches in the building program, we wanted to do something, and that's really amazing. So I had the unique opportunity of drafting my own parents' wills, actually, and sent them to them, and they had them properly executed and signed and so on. The whole point of all of this is when God is the owner and we give it back to Him, we're doing things the way He has asked us to do it. Now, I'm going to make some suggestions of things that you may want to do as you get older, not only to have an estate plan, which would be, you know, part of the plan is distributing the assets while you still can do it, and where you can have the joy of seeing it happen yourself, and either to go over to see, like you could build a church in India and go over and meet the people, put roofs on church buildings in Africa, take a mission trip to Central America or someplace. We're talking about awesome things that can happen that you can see a value. But in addition, I'm going to read something from Revelation. Now, this is an eschatology passage, but I'd like for you to see it from Revelation 13. We have what we call in that chapter the 3 angels' messages and so on. But at the end of that chapter, this is Revelation 14, it's verse 13. Revelation 14:13. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Now, how can our works follow us? Well, if we're passed away, the only way it can happen is with our estate plan. So this is really something awesome that you can think about. I can keep working for God when I pass away if I have a Christian estate plan. I want to give a little summary of what I think should be happening near the end of life. One of the things is that you want to make proper documents because obviously there'll be something in your estate plan that you want to dispose of in some way. Maybe specific items to individuals, a certain portion to ministries that you enjoy, and so on. But you may also want a durable power of attorney so that if you lose the capacity to take care of your finances, that some godly person that you trust can take care of your finances for you. You may want a living will as well, and a health care power of attorney so that if someone needs to make a decision about your health care, someone that you love and trust can do that for you. So I'm going to talk to you just about the legacy that parents can leave their children. Some people say, well, you know, I think that the best heritage is to leave something for the children. The idea is a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. Integrity and principles of honesty and so on can be a heritage that I can leave people. I can leave people with the skills, with the education that we help them to secure, and so on. The best legacy, we're told, is a love for God, a willingness to work, and a good education. These things I think parents owe their children. In fact, we're told in Volume 3 of the Testimonies, page 399, the very best legacy which parents can leave their children is a knowledge of useful labor and the example of a life characterized by disinterested benevolence. By such a life they show the true value of money, that it is only to be appreciated for the good that it will accomplish in relieving their own wants, the necessities of others, and in advancing the cause of God. Well, I thank you for viewing. I want to show you that as we have continued our seminar, we're using the book It's Your Money and the workbook, It's Your Money workbook. And for those who like to review and listen along, we have the CD set also, and this set is available through Omega Productions. I've told you before that you can contact Omega Productions through the 3ABN website. That's 3abn.org. Click on Programming, and then you can click on Programming Resources, and then our program is By My Spirit, and it's in the It's Your Money material. One thing that I would like to leave you with, these 4 common fears of older people: dying too soon, living too long, and so on. If you've taken care of your estate plan, then you're ready at any time to be laid to rest, because you know that your loved ones will be taken care of if they're dependent on you. You know that the ministries that you love and appreciate will advance because you've made proper provision. And you know that your spouse will be taken care of. All of these things can give you peace of mind in your older age. Remember that making a will does not mean that you die sooner. It just means that you die prepared. So I think it's part of our Christian responsibility, part of our accounting to God, to have our estate plan put together, and then we can be blessed in blessing others in all of this. God is great, and He has outlined these awesome principles for us to follow. I think we'll be much happier and have an abundant life if we follow those principles. God bless you as you seek His wisdom and seek to follow these important principles in your life.